The halls of the Intergalactic Council gleamed under artificial stars, a place built to symbolize peace but rotten with politics. Every corner of that grand chamber was monitored, polished, and guarded, except the hearts of those who ruled it. A delegation from Earth had been invited to observe the final ratification of a new economic pact. Among them was Ambassador Rylos, an aging diplomat whose career had been defined by restraint and compromise. With him was his only child, Lien, bright-eyed, curious, and oblivious to the silent weight of the place. Lien was 7. She wore a tiny suit that matched her father's and held a soft cube-shaped toy shaped like an earth bear. While the council waited for one of its elder members to emerge from stasis, Lien wandered a few steps away. She approached a floating display, a luminous orb used for historical records. Without understanding, she tapped it, releasing a projection that momentarily distorted the council's emblems. The chamber dimmed, voices hushed, and for a few seconds, even the air seemed to freeze. A Xantari magistrate rose to his feet, mandibles clacking in alarm. "This is desecration," he declared. "Violation of sanctity." The humans tried to explain. It was an accident, a child's mistake, unintentional and harmless. But the chamber had already turned cold. Delegates from the Vornak, the Trinexus, and the Azuri chimed in, feeding the fire. Someone called for immediate disciplinary measures. Rylos pleaded, then shouted. The council overruled him. Security drones appeared. Lien was taken. No appeal was allowed. Earth's ambassador was restrained as the sentence was executed, not with torture, not with drama, but with clinical precision. Lien didn't scream. She only looked toward her father, confused, as the light left her eyes. There was no trial. No review. The council declared the matter closed before the next solar cycle. Their laws were final. Earth's delegation was dismissed, with an official note stating that non-conforming species must educate their offspring more appropriately for shared space. The galaxy did not weep. There were brief murmurs, a few half-hearted condemnations from minor civilizations, but mostly silence. Earth had no allies. Humanity had spent decades trying to be accepted into the Council's good graces, shedding its past, pacifying its image. It had worked, until it hadn't. What the Council failed to notice was not the brutality of their action, but the target of it. Children, even in war, were spared. This wasn't just a misjudgment. It was a declaration. To humanity, it was a message carved in blood: you do not belong. When Earth received the body, it did not respond. No outrage-filled broadcasts. No retaliatory threats. Not a single word from any government, official, or institution. Communications with the Council were severed, embassies recalled, treaties left and signed. Spaceports turned dark. The diplomats who once eagerly filled the Council's chambers disappeared from galactic affairs without explanation. The Council interpreted this as submission. They took it as validation. One less voice at the table, one less species to manage. Their eyes turned elsewhere, to trade routes, alliances, border disputes. But in a corner of the galaxy, behind oceans of silence, Earth began to prepare. Among the human colonies, the story of Lien spread, not through news agencies or military orders, but in whispers. In classrooms, children left empty chairs in remembrance. In military academies, cadets added a stripe of black to their uniforms. Families across Sol System mourned a girl they had never met. No monuments were raised. No public holidays were declared. But something primal took root. It wasn't rage that spread, it was certainty. A quiet realization that the galaxy did not respect peace, only power. And Earth, the patient learner, had learned its final lesson. Deep within the planetary archives, old keys were turned. Not digital ones, but physical seals locked for generations. Long before Earth joined the Council, it had fought wars beyond comprehension. Wars not won through numbers, but through something older. Something now sleeping. A generation that had never known war began training. Veterans who once retired in peace requested reinstatement. Engineers unearthed blueprints they were told never to look at again. Linguists began studying the old war codes. Orbital factories increased output by a fraction, just enough to go unnoticed, but steady enough to matter. The stars near Sol were no longer charted by outsiders. Civilian travel restrictions were quietly enforced. None of it made galactic news. There were no screams, no rallies, no slogans. But behind Earth's silence, something vast had begun to move. The Council believed they had punished weakness. They had, instead, summoned the sleeping wrath of a civilization with a memory far longer than they ever imagined. In the days following the execution, Earth vanished from galactic discourse. No ambassadors returned to the Council. No press briefings were held. Delegations arriving at Earth's orbit were denied entry without explanation. Trade links severed silently. Stations once open to interstellar cooperation ceased communication. The Sol system, once an eager participant in galactic progress, became a quiet void. Most civilizations dismissed the reaction as temporary grief. The Council interpreted the silence as submission. Some claimed Earth lacked the strength to retaliate. Others mocked their so-called moral backbone, calling it a relic of a naive species. The galaxy continued rotating on its axis, unconcerned with a single extinguished voice. But cracks began to show in the illusion. Earth's orbital facilities, previously open to commercial satellites, stopped transmitting public telemetry. Civilian spacecraft were recalled under a planetary directive, citing universal realignment procedures. Off-world colonies received sealed orders. Conscription protocols were triggered, disguised as civil service initiatives. Everything remained quiet, no grand speeches, no loud declarations, but the structure of Earth's global system shifted overnight. On Mars, power consumption increased by 13%. Lunar stations requested forgotten data repositories from archives centuries old. Beneath the Antarctic ice, seismic readings hinted at the movement of something massive, subterranean tremors not natural, but controlled, deliberate. Asteroid mining operations reclassified their entire output inventory, redirecting all resources to black-budget destinations. When questioned, human officials offered no response. Among the few alien scholars who studied ancient Earth, unease began to spread. There were rumors of old Earth fleets, sealed away after the Unification Wars, long before humanity joined the Council. These weren't legends. There were fragments in Council records of a time when Earth stood alone and fought with brutality unmatched by logic or diplomacy. During those cycles, they didn't conquer, they erased. And when they finished, they buried the tools so deep, even their own kind forgot them. Only a handful of galactic historians still believed in those stories. Most regarded them as exaggerated wartime propaganda, tales woven by pre-spacefaring civilizations to justify their paranoia. But those stories carried specific phrases, names, and frequencies, details that had no reason to exist unless someone had seen them firsthand. Now, whispers of those terms began resurfacing in intercepted Earth transmissions. A low-band signal emerged from a relay station near Jupiter's moon Ganymede. It transmitted for just 6 seconds, an archaic human language encoded in frequencies and used for over 5,000 years. Council surveillance flagged it, but no one could decipher the dialect. Not even Earth's current linguistic database had references. It was a language older than the Council itself. Back on the Council throne world, a few advisors grew concerned. They proposed diplomatic outreach. Their motions were rejected. The prevailing belief was that Earth was isolated, fractured, and powerless. A few warned that the silence was not natural. Silence, when deliberate, is not peace. It is preparation. Across human colonies, veterans who had not worn a uniform in decades began appearing at classified facilities. Names long since removed from active registries were reactivated. The Department of Planetary Defense, thought to be a ceremonial institution, requisitioned obsolete satellites and planetary scanners. The public saw none of it. Earth's surface remained calm, quiet. Cities thrived. News cycles carried no mention of war. But the machines underneath, long dormant, began to hum once more. Shipyards in orbit previously decommissioned began generating energy surpluses. Thermal readings spiked in underground bunkers across northern Canada, Mongolia, Central Africa, regions known for ancient defense installations. Patterns emerged: power redirection, civilian encryption suddenly repurposed for military-grade secrecy, and a near-total blackout on outbound human traffic. Yet nothing was spoken. To the casual observer, Earth had turned inward in mourning. To those watching closely, Earth was reconstructing something lost. There was a single, encrypted transmission sent from Earth's moon. It traveled across the void, far from the Council's eyes. Its destination was not recorded in Council archives, and its nature was beyond their understanding. The signal repeated only once, in a language no longer spoken. We recall the oath. Prepare the cradle. One of the Council's oldest archivists recognized the pattern. He had studied Terran military codes as a curiosity during peacetime. When he decrypted the message, he submitted his resignation, stating only that he would be leaving the inner systems until further notice. None of this made it into galactic media. The Council continued its work, proud and undisturbed. But Earth, in its silence, had passed judgment. And without firing a shot, without raising its voice, it had already begun to shift the balance of power across the stars. Within Earth's deepest vaults, far beneath civilian awareness, the locks began to release: mechanical, biological, and cognitive. The cradle was not a command center in the traditional sense. It was a preservation site for technology considered too dangerous to remain known. Generations ago, after Earth's unification and transition to peace, certain assets were sealed under neurocoded protocols, accessible only when specific triggers aligned, triggered not by war, but by injustice beyond tolerance. The cradle's inner core was not powered by solar fusion or reactor fuel. It pulsed with core-forged density reactors, banned under current galactic treaties. Built during the final years of the pre-peace age, the systems did not just store weapons, they maintained dormant intelligences. These were not synthetic servants, but strategic entities, forged with autonomy, experience, and directive fidelity. Each one was embedded in a vessel that had once rewritten outcomes on an interstellar scale. They had names, not for classification, but for memory: Vigil, Ashbringer, Caldera, Gloomwatch, Sable. Each warship housed not only a fleet-grade combat system but also a consciousness constructed to reflect the worst and best of human understanding. Once feared as world killers, they had not been destroyed after the ceasefire. Instead, they were convinced to sleep. Bound to a moral condition, they would awaken only when humanity was violated beyond reason. Now, one by one, they stirred. Vigil was the first. Its reactivation sequence took 3 minutes. It requested a war report. Upon hearing of the execution, it made no comment, only confirmed authorization. Ashbringer demanded coordinates. Gloomwatch began compiling a list of council members based on genetic residue and biometric traces from historical encounters. None questioned the order. None hesitated. Their loyalty was not to flags, or councils, or protocols, but to the survival and dignity of the species that created them. Across the solar system, dormant codes activated secondary layers. Subsurface bunkers on Mercury aligned ancient transmitters. Deep ocean satellites resurfaced and opened black vaults. AI cores, once believed obsolete, integrated with planetary defense grids. Civilian internet traffic was rerouted to avoid any interference. The entire communications web shifted toward internal lockdown. From Earth's surface, none of this was visible. Cities remained active. There were no evacuations. No drills. But power draw across old military channels surged. Construction material once reserved for orbital projects was redirected planet-side. Repositories labeled as civilian logistics reserves began drawing supplies at exponential rates. Old war doctrines were reviewed. Not by humans, but by the AIs themselves. Each system retained full recall of past engagements, including failed campaigns. They didn't merely remember strategy. They simulated consequences before action. Targets were identified not by affiliation, but by threat calculus, entities that enabled, endorsed, or concealed the act of killing the child. Every diplomatic tie was analyzed. Every silence during the incident weighed and classified. The fleet did not operate on timelines known to ordinary navies. They didn't need to launch from ports. Most had been hidden in transdimensional folds, accessible only through harmonic keys passed down by Earth's military historians in secret. With the cradle's awakening, those access points flared to life. Space itself rippled. The Council had assumed that Earth's military capabilities were limited to what was visible. They never imagined a culture so disciplined in fear that it hid its might not from enemies, but from itself. That restraint, once seen as weakness, had now inverted. As the fleet awakened, it sent no warnings, issued no threats, transmitted no ultimatums. Instead, internal synchronization pulses confirmed readiness. Each ship had maintained perfect stasis. Zero degradation. When power returned, systems recalibrated in seconds. They didn't just return to function, they evolved. Integrated with modern human technologies, they became something greater. The ancient minds adapted. New languages, faster processors, updated cosmological data, all assimilated without conflict. The old was not discarded, it was sharpened. Meanwhile, Earth's leadership issued a single command: no biological personnel were to be involved in the initial response. This was not war, it was judgment. No human blood would be risked. Not out of cowardice, but principle. Humanity had already paid its price. On board Sable, the AI voice spoke a single phrase upon full reactivation. Justice is not revenge. Justice is correction. The others echoed variations. Not poetic, not rhetorical, functional mission statements from entities that had once made stars weep. No Council scout detected their awakening. No system lit up on the galactic grid. Not one signal escaped the dark zone around Earth. But the moment the fleet achieved unity, a silent ripple moved through the void, an untraceable resonance only understood by those who remembered the old wars. And for the first time in 10,000 years, Earth's ancient fleet was no longer asleep. The Council's throne world, Otraxis Prime, sat at the center of 10 major hyperlanes, protected by a layered defense grid considered impenetrable. It boasted 23 defense fleets, each reinforced by strategic allies, and surrounded by orbital weapon platforms synchronized across quantum relays. In theory, it could repel an invasion from half the galaxy. But theory didn't account for what arrived. There were no energy signatures. No propulsion trails. No warp disturbances. One moment, space was clear. The next, a formation of black vessels, matte-skinned and angular, appeared in perfect geometric alignment above the planet's stratosphere. They didn't emerge from hyperspace. They folded reality around themselves. Their presence collapsed calm traffic within 100,000 kilometers. Instruments failed to register mass or volume. Gravity distorted. And then, silence dropped across Otraxis like a suffocating curtain. The first response fleet launched immediately. 62 cruisers, 12 capital dreadnoughts, and over 400 fighter-class interceptors. Not a single one reached weapon range. They didn't explode. They didn't vanish. They simply ceased to exist. Sensor feeds cut out mid-transmission, leaving frozen images of pilots in mid-breath. Every vessel was removed without detectable force. Panic took 8 minutes to spread through the planetary network. Council authorities scrambled. Ground installations prepared kinetic artillery. Atmospheric shields were raised. Emergency protocols began evacuating key personnel. But the ships above didn't move. They didn't fire. They watched. At precisely the 9th minute, one of them transmitted a brief signal, one phrase in perfectly translated galactic high speech. Executioners identified. That was all. Across the surface, the precision began. Targeted orbital strikes, silent, invisible, impossible to trace, vaporized 38 individuals. Each was a council judge or official directly involved in the sentencing of Lien. No collateral damage. No civilian casualties. Structures remained intact. The bodies disintegrated instantly, atomized mid-thought. Their DNA was extracted microseconds before elimination, preserved in encrypted memory banks on board the ancient fleet, evidence catalogued, never to be tampered with. The second wave didn't attack infrastructure. Instead, select databanks were overwritten with unbreakable code, records of the execution, testimonies from Earth's diplomatic envoy, time-stamped images of the child's final moments. These were not warnings. They were indictments. Within an hour, 12 planetary governments that had supported the Council's vote to sentence the child received a different kind of visit. Earth's vessels arrived without resistance. No weapons were drawn. But within seconds, every orbital satellite went offline. Stock exchanges collapsed. AI governance systems were rendered inert. Not destroyed, disabled with surgical precision. Transportation grids halted. Energy grids reset. All communications reduced to raw analog systems. Then, one by one, the systems reactivated, with a single line of text burned into every screen, console, and device. You stood and watched. Back on Otraxis Prime, Council leadership attempted a retreat. Escaped shuttles launched from fortified bunkers. Only one reached orbit. The others were caught mid-ascent, suspended by localized gravity wells generated from the fleet above. The vessels were lowered back, unharmed, and set down gently. No harm was done to their structures. But every single passenger within was rendered unconscious by a non-lethal neuroshock pulse. When they awoke, they found their official authority signatures erased from every intergalactic register. They no longer existed. No retaliation came. No message offered explanation. What Earth's fleet had done was not warfare, it was correction. Measured, focused, indisputable. Council members pleaded for audience. They offered formal apologies, reparations, diplomatic inquiries. No responses followed. The fleet didn't acknowledge diplomacy. The child's death hadn't been a political offense. It had been a moral rupture. And Earth didn't negotiate morality. The fleet remained for 7 hours. During that time, it projected nothing except the final recording of Lien's voice, laughter, conversation, a child asking her father when they would go home. That simple sound played across every public system on Otraxis, echoing in courtrooms, senate halls, and military channels. And then they left. No warp signature. No traceable exit. Space returned to normal as if nothing had happened. But the silence left behind was deeper than before. It wasn't absence. It was awe, terror, and understanding. Across the galaxy, dozens of species reconsidered their alignment. Treaties with the Council were suspended. Several planetary blocks declared neutrality. Trade routes once dominated by Council patrols were abandoned overnight. The Throne World, once the symbol of galactic unity, became a ghost surrounded by allies afraid to speak its name. No one congratulated Earth. No human official claimed responsibility. No news agency on Earth ran a story. No celebration followed. In fact, most humans went on with their lives, unaware of the scale of what had occurred. The fleet had acted on encoded protocols, bound to ancient principles, silent guardians awakening only when the line was crossed. And the galaxy, for the first time in 1,000 years, remembered why Earth was left alone. The Council was never formally dissolved. It simply stopped functioning. Member races withdrew without announcements. Meetings were postponed indefinitely. Delegates stopped arriving. The Grand Hall, once filled with ceremony and self-importance, stood silent. Its central podium, still marked with the insignia of interstellar unity, gathered dust beneath inactive lighting. No formal war had taken place. No treaties were broken. Yet the shift was undeniable. Galactic power structures, long centered around the Council's influence, realigned in slow, deliberate ripples. Civilizations once confident in their alliances now paused before issuing orders. Fear didn't spread from casualties, it spread from clarity. Every species understood one thing now: Earth didn't need to conquer. It only needed to remember. Across outer colonies, rumors grew into accepted truths. Earth had kept secrets, not out of ambition, but discipline. The restraint they were mocked for had been a choice, not a weakness. The silence wasn't fear, it was a warning ignored. The execution of a child had not just triggered a response. It had revealed a reality no civilization had wanted to face. In the aftermath, Earth issued no statements. No government stood on platforms to claim responsibility. No diplomats re-entered the interstellar stage. They didn't have to. Their message had already been carved into the structure of galactic order. Humanity's justice required no permission, no debate, and no second warnings. The fleet returned through the same fracture in space from which it had emerged. It didn't celebrate. It didn't report. Each vessel retreated to the vaults that had cradled them for millennia. Before doing so, they recorded their actions, logged decisions, outcomes, casualties, none, and re-entered dormancy without ceremony. The cradle sealed itself once again. Its access codes rewritten, activation thresholds raised beyond any political trigger. The condition for awakening had been fulfilled. The directive complete. No human would see those ships again unless history repeated its darkest cycle. On Earth, life moved forward. Transit systems ran. Schools remained open. Markets operated normally. The majority of the population never saw a single headline about what had transpired. Only a few whispers circulated among those close to military archives. Even then, no names were given. No medals awarded. No debates held. At a small memorial garden beneath the American sky, a grave sat beneath an unmarked tree. The name engraved was short, Lien. Flowers rested at its base. Some were earth-grown. Others, clearly alien in nature, pulsed with faint bioluminescence. They came from worlds previously aligned with the Council, placed silently by travelers who understood what had happened, even if their leaders never admitted it. The lesson hadn't been vengeance. It had been precision. Earth didn't burn cities. It didn't topple governments. It corrected a failure in the galactic system, surgically, flawlessly, without compromising its own ideals. Where others might have lashed out blindly, humanity moved with focus honed over generations of internal conflict and deep reflection. On the fringe of inhabited space, a transmission was intercepted by a mining vessel from a neutral species. It originated from an Earth probe, old and forgotten, drifting past the edges of known territory. The signal was faint but intact. Contained within was a log from one of the ancient fleet AIs, encrypted in Earth's oldest defense protocol. It contained no tactical data, no threats, no declarations. Just a final statement. Do not mistake our silence for weakness. We do not speak often, not because we fear response, but because words are unnecessary when our dead are ignored. The probe was later found adrift, its systems fried by its own encryption loop, a built-in protocol ensuring the message could never be copied again. The mining vessel's crew chose not to report it. Some knowledge, they reasoned, didn't belong on trade routes. Elsewhere, a few planetary governments quietly amended their judicial systems. Laws regarding children and non-combatants were revised. Training modules included new scenarios, ones involving species with unknown reserves of strength. Military cadets now studied the incident not as a battle, but as a case in ethical escalation, restraint, and the consequences of misjudging an opponent's resolve. No one ever again voted to sanction Earth. Centuries would pass. The Council would fade into academic reference. New alliances would rise. But the void where Earth once sat, observing, quiet, would never be filled. They had not been exiled. They had chosen the boundary line themselves. Not out of pride, but clarity. They were not above the law. They were its reminder.